Hello quilters! Today I am going to show you how I do machine applique, and we'll be working on our glistening block from the We Can Build a Snowman block of the month, our current project. I have prepared my applique pieces, the little round snowman heads. I went ahead and before I attached them to my blocks, I went ahead and drew my details onto them because it's a lot easier to trace those details on before you add it to your block. So I went ahead and did that, and then have attached my snowmen to my block so they are ready to go. I also have attached stabilizer to the back. This will help make our stitches more even and keep the fabric smooth without all the puckers that you sometimes can get without it. So the stabilizer is a very important thing to do. Okay, so now I need to get my machine set up. I currently have my piecing foot on there, and I need to switch that out for this wide toe embroidery foot. Put that in place here. And then I'm going to make some adjustments to the stitches on my machine. I'm going to be using a double buttonhole stitch. I happen to like that one better than the plain buttonhole stitch. It gives it a deeper, more depth, I guess, to the stitch than just having one thread run on it. And then I also am doing that in combination with a straight stitch. So I have my little cheat sheet here of what I need to do. For my buttonhole, I need to set my stitch width to a 2.0, and then my stitch length is going to be a 1.9. That just happens to be on these smaller pieces. That happens to be the size of the bite of the buttonhole stitch. I like that 2.0 width, and so I want my length to be as close to that width as possible. It gives a nicer, even look to the stitch. Okay, and then I'm also doing my straight stitch, so I'm going to program that into my sewing machine here. It will remember my two stitches, so all I have to do is click the number for the stitch, and it will remember how I have it set up, which is nice. Alright, so my straight stitch, I'm also wanting that stitch length to be 1.9. And then I'm going to move my needle position over 2 places to the right. That way it will line up nicely with where the straight stitch on the buttonhole is, and so that's a neat little trick and tip. And I also want my needle in the down position so that whenever I stop, my needle will stop in the fabric, and that makes, especially when we're doing things like circles, it makes it easier to pivot your fabric without having the needle move at all, which is a very nice thing to do. Okay, so let's get started. We're ready to sew. When I start, I will put my needle down right on the edge of where the applique meets the fabric of the block. And I like to, some people sew with the applique right on the edge and use this as a guide. I find that I like to have mine out more in the middle where I can really keep an eye on things. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab a hold of my top thread and pull up that bobbin thread so that it is laying on top of the piece and not tempted to get tangled up underneath as I stitch around my snowman. Get those out of the way, and I'm going to put my needle back down in that hole right next to that applique. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is my straight stitch, and I'm going to take 4 or 5 stitches just to get things started. And I do this fairly slowly when I'm working on a curve. I'll do one more here. Okay, now I'm going to switch to my buttonhole stitch, and away we will go. Again, I do not go quickly. Did you notice how I can lift up my presser foot and move where I know that my stitch is going to fall by knowing that that stitch is going to be a straight stitch that's coming up. I know how to line up my fabric so it hits right on that edge. So we'll start with our buttonhole stitch. This is going to be my rhythm of the day. Now with a regular buttonhole stitch, it's just going to take the step forward, go over, back, forward, over, back. and so you'll have a single thread. I happen to like the depth with having the several stitches, and also that rhythm helps me to know where to stop when I'm doing things like a square with corners or things like that. It helps me to know in advance that, okay, I'm going to end up stopping right there. Is that where I want to stop? And so as you play with the buttonhole stitch, you'll get more comfortable with that process. And like I said, I do not sew quickly when I'm doing this. I take my time. Both my machine and I are just happier that way. I start out fairly slowly and will go a little bit faster, especially if I have a straight. But when I'm sewing around a curve and I'm making lots of little adjustments, I tend to go rather slowly. One of the things you might want to do if you have not played with machine applique before is to cut out a large circle, just like you would prepare these circles for our quilt, and attach it to a piece of fabric with some stabilizer on the back, and just practice going around a large circle to get a sense and a feel for what you like and which stitch you might want to use. I started out using zigzag stitch pretty much, well, basically a satin stitch, feeling like it covered up any mistakes I made and unevenness I had. But I have gotten to where this double buttonhole stitch is my favorite, partly because it looks more like I did it by hand, very evenly, but it just goes nicely. So you just kind of watch me go around the circle here. I feel like I should have some music playing for you to pass the time as you wait. One of the things I mentioned in the directions for doing the applique and preparing your pieces was to make sure you have all your edges down with the iron. Otherwise you can get a little bunched up part. So you want to make sure that those are attached well to your fabric. Little lessons I have learned along the way that I'm sharing with you. So I'm using a couple of superior threads. I have King Tut in my top thread. I like the King Tut for this project because it doesn't have a high sheen to it, meaning it's not very shiny, and I just didn't want shiny with this project. So the King Tut works well. The King Tut is also a variegated thread, so while it's hard to see on the video here that it's not just a plain white, there's some subtle variations in it. And then on my bobbin, I have the Masterpiece thread in white. So I like to kind of match my bobbin thread to the color of my top thread. So if anything shows through, it doesn't really show to anybody. So, whereas if I were using a blue or something like that, I'd be able to see if my bobbin thread pulled up on top somehow. And I don't stress about being perfect. In fact, I have down here by my machine, finished is better than perfect. But I like perfect when it happens, but I don't stress about, life is meant to be enjoyed, and if I'm not enjoying the process, why am I doing it? So I don't worry about it. Okay, I'm starting to get close to where I started, so what I'm going to do now is just trim these little threads out of the way so they will not be a problem. And I'll continue on around my circle. Also, when I'm doing this, I do not hold my hands very tightly against the fabric. I want the machine to do the work, so it's that back and forth motion my machine is doing. I'm just keeping the fabric in place where I want it. So my hands are just lightly on the fabric, going back and forth, but I'm not forcing it. It's just the machine doing all the work. Make another adjustment here. And you notice too, usually when I make my adjustments, I wait till I'm back on the edge of my applique rather than doing it when I've taken the bite. I call that with the over here taking the bite, where the stitch takes the bite out of the fabric. I only started doing machine applique about 5 years ago, I think it was, on a quilt project, and I had been wanting to learn applique just because of all the beautiful quilts that were out there that I wanted to give a try to, so it expanded my piecing a good bit. And at first I was, really nervous about doing it and concerned and scared and all those other words that some of you are probably feeling. But once I played with it a bit, it really has become one of my favorite things to do, to add nice touches to our pieced blocks or to do a completely applique quilt, which I haven't done yet, but I like the process. Okay, we're getting close to those straight stitches that I started with, and what we're going to do is just stitch right over the top of them, and that will lock everything into place. That's a little trick I learned when I was learning how to do machine applique. I watched a lot of videos, and one of the ones that I watched was how Ricky Timms did his applique, so a lot of mine is exactly what I learned from his video. And he starts and stops with that straight stitch, which was a neat little tip. I'm trying to figure out how do I not lose stitches after I'm finished, so it locks them in nicely. And there's some tricks we do when we're not coming right back around on it too, that it still works very well with. Okay, I'm almost to where I started my buttonhole stitch. I'm going to do this last. And see, now I know I need to stop there for my straight, and I'm switching now to my straight stitch to finish off, and I'll take another 4 or 5 stitches. And notice how the needle is falling right in place with where my previous stitches were for the buttonhole stitch, because I have them set to the same length. Okay, and then I'll finish with my locking stitch on my machine. And there we have it, he's all done. Just cut him loose here. Trim off that. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove my pins. Stick them in my pin cushion here. And the stabilizer I have, it's a water soluble one, so it will soften and loosen up over time. But I just will tear off the extra around the outside. And there we have it. Our little snowman is appliqued in place and ready for the embroidery. Well, I hope this helps you with figuring out how to do your machine applique, and you'll get brave and give it a try. If you have any questions, be sure and contact me either through my website on the contact page, or send me a message on Facebook, or however you would like to get in touch, email, whatever. So, and I'll be happy to answer your questions, and I hope that this will help you have success with your quilt block. So, happy quilting!